inevitable. If you are making paper craft projects, you are going to make a mess. You are probably going to lose your scissors and you are going to get left with paper scraps. They're like weeds in the garden, impossible to get rid of. I was thinking about just that, and that's when the reality of the situation hit me. For every project I create, I get more and more paper scraps. So I decided it was time for a paper scrap busting challenge. I've pulled out 50 different paper scraps from my stash and I plan on using them all. Here are the rules. Rule number 1, a paper scrap is not a scrap unless it's less than 6 inches wide. Rule number 2, the challenge is complete when I've used 50 paper scraps. And did I mention I want to do this in just 5 days? Really? Just 5 days? 5 days. Rule number 3, any paper scrap left on day 5 must go into the recycling, no matter how pretty it is. In this video, I'll share a surprisingly simple idea that works on lots of different paper craft projects. I'm starting here because it's a great way to use up a bunch of scraps all at once. Let's see just how many of these scraps I can use up today. So here's what I'm working with. These are the 50 paper scraps that I'll be creating with over the next 5 days. To make things just a little bit easier on myself, I have pulled out scraps only from my Maggie Holmes collections. That way I know that they're all going to work together quite well. As you can see, I've got pattern paper scraps, ugly paper scraps, white and neutral paper scraps, and even some teeny tiny paper scraps. No scrap left behind. Today's project also starts with a paper scrap. This one though is from my stash and it does not matter what color it is because it will be covered up as we go along. Think of it as a base or an anchoring point that we can layer our paper scraps on top of. Essentially, we're going to make a patchwork quilt. A paper patchwork quilt, that is. I do want my quilt to coordinate, so I am going to be working with the warm tones in the scraps that I have. I'm using that really lovely mustard yellow tone as a reference. I am also trimming the papers as I go because a lot of the papers I have here are quite large for this idea, so I want to trim them into smaller rectangular shapes. At this stage, I'm thinking a lot about what colors are going to go where. I do want this to look quite random and organic, but I do want the colours to be balanced across this piece of cardstock. Speaking of random and organic, I hope you're noticing the outside edge of the piece of cardstock that I'm working on. Notice that the pieces that I'm placing are not lining up. I've talked about this a lot on the channel, but not in a little while. I want the outside edge of this piece to be interesting. I don't want it to be a perfect rectangle as such with 4 perfectly straight lines. I do want this to appear a little bit more like a patchwork. So I'm not lining up those pieces perfectly. I'm thinking much more about the color mix and the print mix as I place things than I am about the alignment of them. You can see here too that I'm not just placing the pieces one on top of each other. I am actually weaving them and layering them in. So some of the pieces will go on the top layers and some will be woven into more of the bottom layers. I'm loving the look of this, so much so that I'm going to create a card today as well. I'll start with another piece of scrap card, but this one actually is measured to fit my card base. I've found for cards, it's so much easier to know the exact dimensions that you're working with, and they are a little bit different to the scrapbook layout format because you want your edges to be nice and crisp and clean and and lined up perfectly. To achieve this, all I've done is trimmed off that excess with my fussy cutting scissors. For this card, I did start with some of the larger pieces first, and once I got that card base covered and looking good, I've then added in some smaller pieces for a little bit of extra detail. Now, you can use these pieces just like this. I, however, wanted to add some extra detail, so I have added in some stitching. It adds beautiful texture and detail, and these are now ready to use on projects. I will start with the scrapbook layout and then move on to the card. Here's a look at the photos that I'm working with, and I'm sure now you can see why I really wanted to draw on those beautiful warm colour tones. This photo was taken on my daughter's birthday, and I love the sage green in her top, and then the filter kind of made the wall very creamy, and I just really wanted to run with that colour scheme. It's so pretty. So what I've done with our paper scrap quilt that we created is run it as a strip along one side of the layout. Now you could do this horizontally like I have for this layout, or you could do it vertically. I actually imagine spending a lot of time just creating a bunch of these and having them sitting in a dish on my desk ready to go to add to all sorts of projects. I feel like they could be a win-win, something that's really great to do if you were missing your mojo or you weren't really wanting to commit to a full layout, so you could create some of these. But then when it came time to create, you'd have something that was a jumping off point. You wouldn't really be starting from scratch. I'd also love to add these to my junk journals and imagine them in beautiful textured vintage paper. They would be so nice. Now also, any of the sketches that you might have that has a vertical or horizontal panel of pattern paper, you could replace that panel with one of these. Instead of trying to find a large piece of pattern paper for your sketch, why not use a bunch of your paper scraps that coordinate and use this instead? Now we need to talk about layout design, and I am running with the horizontal lines for this one. I do want the eye to be drawn left to right across the page. So I am going to work with a large embellishment cluster in the top left-hand corner, and then balance that out with some embellishments down here in the bottom right-hand corner of that second photo. I am going to run with florals and butterflies, because florals and butterflies, and they are actually quite curved in nature, and I do want to be mindful that the layout doesn't end up being too blocky. There are a lot of rectangles in the paper patchwork that we made. I've also added a rectangular journaling spot on the right there, and I'm working with 2 rectangle photos, so I am mindful that I'll need to balance out a little bit of that blockiness and create some smooth and round lines. The round wings of the butterflies and of course the soft petals in the flowers will really help with that. I'm really running with the gold accents on this layout, but I do want to be mindful that they're balanced out across the page. I don't want them all in just one spot. So to help with that, I am going to cut that acetate piece in two, and I'll use those as 2 separate pieces. I do end up auditioning them in quite a few places because I really want to have a heaviness to the left-hand side of the layout that tapers out as it moves towards the right, and it did take a little bit of work to get that balance right. I was hoping that that large oval pink chipboard piece on the left there would do it. Spoiler alert, it does not stay, but it does stick around for a while. You know what will always work? A bow. I'm all about them bows. While I think about the left-hand side, I will get working on the right-hand side. So I know the camera seems a little bit out there, but what I was trying to do was balance out the green in the leaves of that pattern paper above the second photo. The green there was sort of standing out to me a little bit, and I was trying to balance that colour out a little bit on the layout. What I found though was that the camera kind of made the green stand out more, so it does not stay. Neither does the deer actually, even though he is super cute. What I do like about the camera is that it acts as a bit of a full stop. It's a place for the eye to rest as it moves from left to right. So I did switch it out with a die cut sentiment. This one is in a colour that fits the scheme of things much more closely. It's time to add on the title, and I am going with a gold puffy sticker for that. And can you see? I have re-auditioned that green camera. I even tried it with a green bow on the left there in the hope that that might balance things out. But to me, all it did was made the green more obvious, which of course it did because I'm adding more green, but not in a good way. I think I'm just going to have to live with it. Okay, so let's talk clusters. I know that I want to have a visual triangle around my photos, just as I was showing there. But in the end, I wasn't really loving these deep red roses. So I switched them out too. I feel like this layout was such a journey. Do you ever have that happen? I just really wanted to press into that neutral color scheme. So the pink chipboard piece on the left, that's gone. It's now that really lovely muted yellow. I've switched out 2 of the floral elements for gold and white versions, and it's feeling a lot more balanced. With that finally sorted, it is time to finish out the clusters and call the layout done. Here's a look at the completed layout, and of course I have close-up images to share. I want to show you the paper patchwork quilt that we've made, as well as all the details in those embellishment clusters. Next up, I want to show you how this idea works for a card. So of course, I'm going to start with the card base that I already prepped at the beginning of the video, and I am just going to keep this really simple. I've layered up a couple of simple die cut embellishments, and I'm going to create a cluster for the center of the card. For an extra detail, I'm going to layer in a couple of bows. The gold one here is a puffy sticker, and the cute little pink one, that has been fussy cut out of some pattern paper. For the sentiment, I'm going to work with a simple chipboard piece. This one says, "Thankful for you." I'm going to place that towards the bottom of the cluster because my bows are going to sit here at the top. I do find it best to use a liquid adhesive for puffy stickers, and now I can attach this entire front piece onto my card base. And that is the card complete. How simple was that? At the end of day 1, I'm feeling pretty good. There is just one thing that is bothering me, and that is the ugly paper scraps. It's always such a challenge to make them look good, and it's hard not to just want to pop them straight in the recycling. That would be cheating, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be cheating. I'll have to come up with a clever way to use them up, and I'll tackle that tomorrow. I'll see you all again very soon. Until then, bye.